more about this midair collision through sort of that standard procedure from the NTSB investigative perspective when a midair collision occurs.
Well, obviously, the safety board's going to have a team there right as we speak. I'm sure they're there, and they're deferring to the rescue and recovery people at this point in time. But I'm sure they're already also looking at the air traffic control audio tapes as well as the radar tapes, and they will be, as you know, they conduct autopsies on the crew members, and probably the most critical autopsy will be on the Army aviators to try to find out which either the pilot or co-pilot was flying the aircraft. There's a way you can do that by, frankly, looking at the thumbs of those pilots. The thumb tends to be broken if you're holding onto the control stick at impact. So it's, it's kind of a grisly business, but it's necessary so they can figure out what they could see from outside the cockpit. You understand, the Black Hawk has good forward visibility, but there are structures that block your view of the outside, and that'll be critical because I noticed in the videos there was a third airplane that was in the area, and reportedly they were told to pass behind the American jet, and if they mistook the third airplane for the American jet, it may go a long way to explaining this, but that's what the NTSB will do. They're very meticulous. They'll start looking at the data I mentioned and expand it from there. They'll look at the procedures of the controllers and the pilots, as well as the airspace. It's very restricted. I've flown in and out of that airport, as a matter of fact, as a pilot, and you really have to be on your game to get in and out of there because there's so much traffic and so little extra airspace. You've got all kinds of restricted areas, and the controllers are very busy.
Clearly, so many layers, and we're only in this infancy stage. You mentioned meticulous investigation. So, I think we heard from earlier today the Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, weighing in and saying that early indication, they have a sense of what could have happened here. But how long do these types of investigations generally take?
Well, by international law, the NTSB has to release an initial report in 30 days. But to be honest, it'll probably go on for weeks and months beyond that. Typically, it's a year or two before the final so-called board report comes out. But we'll know a lot more in the ensuing days and weeks. And like I said, in 30 days, the NTSB will issue a report. And of course, you understand this is a no-fault investigation. The NTSB is different than, say, the FAA, which is going to be looking for blame, if you will. I've worked for the FAA also. So they'll be, this is strictly to find out what happened, why it happened, and how to prevent reoccurrences. So hopefully we'll know something within a matter of a few weeks.
You mentioned the air traffic control recordings. What might we learn from them?
Well, clearly, we've got to find out what the controllers on duty at Reagan Airport told the two pilots to do. It appears from the video that the helicopter coming down from the north merged with the American jet. But again, we don't know what the helicopter pilots acknowledged or what they said back to the controllers. And again, I'm an aviation psychologist. Voice inflections will be critical also because there may be an indication that the Army pilots didn't understand what they were being told to do. And I'm only speculating. I'm not suggesting that's the case, but that's why the NTSB will be so meticulous about this inquiry as the days and weeks unfold.
Now, Dr. Deal, from your perspective, and we'll let you go here pretty soon, though. From your perspective on this, if you're flying at night, and I know you said that there's a little plane and we know about all that, but at night with those bright lights and those big planes, Is there any scenario where you would not see that other plane and create this? And again, I know you're not investigating this, but you've flown before, and you said you've flown in and out of this airport.
As a matter of fact, I also investigated the 1982 Air Florida crash at this airport. But you're right. You're absolutely right. The light, you got to remember at night, of course, the airplanes all have lights, but they're often obscured by the background lights, the city lights. So trying to pick out a particular airplane that you're supposed to cross behind, if that was in fact what is on the tapes, is very critical. And a lot of times it's difficult, especially at night, to see other aircraft when they're masked by the background lights of the city. You're correct. That's a big problem for pilots.
Dr. Deal, you briefly mentioned that you were here for the 1982 plane crash. That's what, 40 years ago here in DC, eerily similar to what we are seeing play out, sadly, now today. In that case, Air Florida Flight 90 plunging into the icy water below. Again, in that situation, it was a passenger jet colliding with a Army Black Hawk helicopter, or excuse me, a similar situation. But if you could take us back to that and provide some perspective from your experience.
Well, in many ways, is vastly different. It was daytime. It was a takeoff accident. It involved some miscommunication on the cockpit of the Air Florida jet. The co-pilot realized that something was wrong. They had ice on the wings. They weren't going to be able to fly, and they didn't push their engines up to full power to avoid the bridge. So that was quite a bit different than what happened last night. Interestingly, in 1949, there was a very similar accident to last night, and that involved an Eastern DC-4. These are all 49. They were all piston-powered aircraft, and a Bolivian World War II fighter plane called a P-38, and they literally collided over the Potomac, not too far, as I understand it, from where this accident last night occurred. So that 1949 accident is much more similar, in my opinion. Now, I don't know I obviously didn't investigate the 1949 accident, but both aircraft, I understand, ended up in the Potomac, and I believe it was close to 50 people died aboard the Eastern airliner. The Bolivian pilot managed to survive.
Dr. Deal, you also have investigated Black Hawk crashes, the very type of military helicopter that was involved in this mid-air collision. What can you tell us about maybe the maneuvering capability, what might have gone wrong? We, again, understand that you are not involved in this investigation, but just from your expertise, as we're looking at a Black Hawk right now.
Well, one of the big issues, and the NTSB will do this, they call it, they'll do an optometric examination of what each pilot in the Black Hawk could see from his or her crew position. So they know what the view, the eye reference point is on the Black Hawk co-pilot and pilot seat. And you have vertical structures like the door frame, and there's a window partition that runs down the middle of the helicopter. I'm saying if, I don't know this is what the NTSB will have to.
All right, so that's pretty crazy. You know, we'll have to see the damage of the plane to see. It looks like the front of the plane was damaged, right? Like the top of it where the pilots were in the jet was like ripped away or something, or damaged. So how did helicopter, this military helicopter, not see that jet? Or how did the jet not see? But here's the thing, they both were on radar, and the tower was talking to both of them. So how did this happen? I don't know. What they really need to do is they need to get the manifest to see who was on that plane or who was on that military helicopter, if there was any any big wig or anything on that military helicopter. And the same thing with the passengers. You know, I've heard a couple people say that, like, did they deliberately take it out? Who knows? That's a hard one to call. I don't, you know, deliberately. I don't know. You can see both of them on the video. How did they not see each other? I don't know.
Determine if the American jet was hidden by some of that structure for either one or both pilots, that will go a long way to explaining why they didn't react. And of course, I know Senator Duckworth flew the Black Hawk. She says it has great forward visibility. I agree with her, but there are structures that could have obscured the American jet, and particularly if you have a third airplane out there and you see that aircraft and you think you're looking at the American jet, you know you're going to be behind that other jet, so you might not be as alert, continuing to look out. Now, I'm sure they were looking out, but you got to remember there's probably one of those pilots that's handling the radio, Black Hawk pilots that's handling the radios and also the maps, because they're in restricted airspace. And the reality is they know if they violate a restricted airspace or an air traffic controller instruction, they could be in disciplinary situations. They could, as a matter of fact, they could even lose their future civilian licenses if they get a violation. So these Army pilots, I'm sure they were trying to be very conscientious, but at night, under certain circumstances, I've seen it so many times over my 40 years of investigating plane crashes that they're victims too. They fall victim. They're only human, and it takes a number of seconds to react. So even if you did see the airliner at the last second, it would typically take 3 or 4 seconds for them to react, and then of course the helicopters got to react to the control input from the pilot. So
we do know that this was a training flight. Does that factor in any way here with the Black Hawk helicopter?
Well, it's probably the only thing that means is at least one of the Black Hawk pilots was probably an instructor, i.e., highly experienced.
Right.
So we don't know what type of.
All right, so there's rumors going around that it was a flight instructor, it was a training mission. So could this have happened? The person that they were training to fly the helicopter couldn't understand the radar, couldn't read the radar, or very interesting, you know. But from what I see of this helicopter, the whole front of it is open. You can see pretty good. It's got good visibility, and there's usually a guy in the back where you can see the door is open, right? And that itself has 2 windows on the side of it to look out. So would they been able to see? I would think so. How do you not see a giant light in the sky? That real bright giant light was the jet. How did they not see that? The only thing I can think of is maybe the plane was behind the helicopter, or they just collided. I don't know. They were on a flight path probably, and it could have been air traffic controllers. I mean, them dudes are so overworked. Sometimes they hallucinate and they see stuff on radar that's not there. And sometimes they miss stuff on radar that's really there. So it could be a little bit of everything, right?
Training flight it was. We know there were out of Fort Belvoir,
Yes.
but not really, except for the fact that you have to have, normally you have an instructor aboard if it's a training flight. So that'll be examined. And of course, you know, the Army Safety Center is located in Alabama, Dothan, Alabama, and they'll be sending reps. the NTSB will have people, not only the Air Traffic Controllers Union, the American Airlines Pilot Union, they'll have the Army Safety Center, the FAA headquarters people will be there. So this is a team effort that the NTSB puts together. They call it the party system. But everybody that has an interest in this accident is allowed to participate in the initial so-called field phase of the investigation to find facts. So they can find out what happened, why it happened, and then the NTSB will make recommendations to prevent reoccurrence.
Now, Dr. Deal, from an investigator standpoint, we've heard some of the other leaders talk about the fuselage, the flight pattern, the black box, and the communications. All will let them know what exactly happened and where the fault was. Give us some perspective as an investigator how that actually works when you take all this and you can actually put it all together somehow and say, okay, this is where this went wrong.
Well, as I said, they're going to put together a group of people from each of those parties, the Army, the Pilots Union, the Controllers Union, and they try to make sure they've got all the facts, all right? And sometimes there's difference. Then eventually you have to do the analysis, and that's done by NTSB civil servants behind closed doors, because sometimes you'll get contradictory testimonies. That's understandable. Nobody wants to be quote unquote blamed. And by the way, I will repeat, the NTSB does not assign blame. They only find facts and interpret them. So that's the process. And again, like we said earlier, this goes on for typically weeks and months as more and more data comes in. But we're lucky in this case because there seems to be, first of all, videotape of the actual collision. We know there's radar tapes. Unfortunately, we don't have a voice recorder aboard the black box, aboard the Black Hawk helicopter. At least in my investigations, I've never known a Black Hawk to have a voice recorder. So we may not know what the two Black Hawk pilots were saying to each other. But one thing to keep in mind that these guys.
Well, I'm kind of shocked that there is no voice recorder on a military or a black box that records everything. Let me look for another feed real quick to see what else we got going out there. So far, 28 bodies have been recovered. Oh, boy.
As I mentioned, next of kin are ongoing. It's a tragedy, a horrible loss of life for those 64 souls on that civilian airliner, and of course, the 3 soldiers in that Black Hawk. They're in our prayers, their families and their communities. As people are notified, I can't imagine. And I know it's gone from a rescue mission to a recovery mission, and we're with all the first responders that are moving actively too. So at the Defense Department, our thoughts and prayers go out. We are actively investigating to find out what happened and why. And as we get updates, you will have them. God bless.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth there with one of the first substantial updates that we've received officially from the Department of Defense, including, of course, that they have not yet notified family members of the lives lost on that Army Black Hawk helicopter that was part of that collision at around 9 o'clock last night with that American Airlines flight. Also adding, and I want to bring back in our Gabe Gutierrez, who is live near the scene. Some new information here, Gabe. that it was a fairly experienced crew. They had been on a training flight, which we knew that training flight was specifically for night evaluation, essentially, adding that the crew was in night vision goggles, essentially. These are all clues, right, that investigators can use moving forward to figure out what went so wrong here.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Hallie. Look, this initially, when we heard it was a training mission, you could jump to the conclusion perhaps this was an inexperienced pilot. That does not appear to be the case, as we're hearing from the defense secretary and from other authorities. This was part of a routine mission, one of those training in some sense, but just to kind of a refresher, it seems like. So these were experienced pilots. We also heard from local officials as well that the pilots of the regional jet were experienced. The pilot had been with the company for at least 6 years, the co-pilot for 2 years as well. And now, sadly, Hallie, we're also starting to learn more information on who may have been on that flight. According to the Skating Club of Boston, at least 14 figure skaters are feared dead. According to Russian state media, 2 world champion figure skaters are also feared dead as well. And that comes after there was a development camp for figure skating as part of the National Figure Skating Championships in Wichita, Kansas. So we're still learning more information about those victims, and I'm sure we'll learn more throughout the day as next of kin are notified. But local officials in Wichita are also planning a prayer service, a community-wide service a little later on today, as family members are now starting to learn this devastating news that so many people lost their lives here, Hallie.
Gabe Gutierrez, stand by. I want to go back to Peter Alexander, who's outside the White House with some new reporting on what the president's expected to do today, Peter.
Yeah, Hallie, we had been asking this question of the White House for the course of the last several hours, and now I've just confirmed with a White House official that President Trump will be delivering remarks on that tragic plane helicopter collision above the Potomac. The president expected to deliver those remarks at some point this morning. No indication exactly how soon that will happen. I anticipate it'll happen likely within the next couple of hours as they try to get their ducks in the row in preparation for a public statement from the president. We have heard from him via social media and from a statement released by the White House overnight. But again, to confirm, President Trump will be delivering remarks, on camera remarks, at some point in the course of the next few hours in response to the awful tragedy that we witnessed last night, Hallie.
This is a moment, Peter, for President Trump to step in the role that presidents sometimes have to do of consoler-in-chief as well as commander-in-chief.
I think you're exactly right. And it's an opportunity for the president to say that he has his team in place, that they are all hands on deck, as we have heard from his national security advisor, Mike Waltz, who I spoke to a short time ago. Pete Hegseth putting out that statement only a matter of hours ago. Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, was with him in the Situation Room last night, briefing him. Sean Duffy, the transportation secretary, was speaking on camera as part of those briefings taking place from DCA Reagan Airport earlier today. But I do think it's possible that you hear from the president saying that he needs to have some of his other cabinet members confirmed. The director of national intelligence nominee, Tulsi Gabbard, is testifying today. Kash Patel, his FBI director, also testifying today. We heard from Mike Waltz earlier, which I think is why I suggest this, giving us a preview, that they really need to have the full cabinet filled. So that will try to put some pressure on the Democrats who've been resistant to some of these picks. It'll be up to them to determine whether or not after today's testimony they're comfortable with those nominees. But the president also faces a unique challenge. And I have to say, from having covered President Trump for most of the last decade, many of his supporters, even among his supporters, they often like his actions, but not his words. And I think there was some concern last night that the president, without a full slate of information, made some comments where he was critical of the control tower. As he said, telling the helicopter, should have told the helicopter what to do instead of asking if they saw the plane. As we've been reporting, the control tower did tell them what to do. They said, pass behind the CRJ. So I think that's among the questions, frankly, reporters are interested in right now. But clearly, this is a national tragedy. 67 people lost their lives today, not just Americans, but it appears to be some Russians, as well as part of the figure skating community there. As we've been reporting, the next of kin, that process, the notification process for the military is already underway, though not.
You have got to be kidding me. Figure skaters from Russia. and the plane goes down? Are you kidding me? Are they doing everything in their power? I hope so. I would get on the phone with Putin and give our condolences. You know, this ain't gonna look good, folks. A military helicopter slamming into. Where was the communication lost there? How did they not see him? It's the United States military. They see everything. Very interesting. This ain't going to be good. This is just getting worse and worse in this country. Now, I would be on the phone with Russia and try and explain this to them. If I was Trump, I'd be already on the phone with Putin. We had a little problem. Don't know yet. Training mission. Good God.
Not yet completed. For the 64 others, the 60 passengers and 4 crew members on that American Airlines aircraft, that process is also taking place right now. And notably, so is the recovery effort. Last night, as I was standing along the banks of the Potomac, some of the most haunting images that stick with me are watching some of the search and rescue with the time boats who were patrolling along the banks of the river. There were park police using flashlights where at the moment we thought perhaps they were looking for survivors, but it is now clear that at that hour where no one could survive in that water for more than 15 to 30 minutes, hypothermia sets in, the temperatures there are 35 degrees. We now know that it was a search likely for bodies at that time as well. So really a unique opportunity for the president to address the American people in what is really an awful day for so many.
And Peter, as you've been live on the air here, we have heard from the press secretary confirming the timing of that. It will be 11 o'clock Eastern. So looking at our clock, just about an hour from now, and the president will appear in the briefing room, Peter. And I know that you will be there. We'll be carrying that live right here on NBC News Now. Peter, thanks. We'll see you soon. I want to bring in our senior aviation correspondent, Tom Costello, who is joining us now live from the scene, who has been covering this from the moment that it happened. Tom, can you bring us up to speed on where the investigation goes from here? Do we have any update yet on when we might hear from the NTSB? Any word on the recovery of those critical black boxes yet?
No word yet on the black boxes. The NTSB told us earlier this morning they've not yet recovered the flight data recorder or the cockpit voice recorder from either the RJ, the regional jet, or the chopper. We would expect the NTSB to make comments at some point today. Highly unlikely, having covered NTSB for 20 years, highly unlikely they're going to reveal much in this very first news conference. They will essentially set the scene, announcing that they're on the scene, that they have so many investigators here, so many specialists, and they will break down the investigation into various areas, everything from cockpit to air traffic control to engine performance to plane performance, all of that. They will have specialists designated and then also looking at the rescue operations. So right now, the investigators, and again, NTSB headquarters is a 10-minute drive from here. It's right across the river. They were on the scene immediately. And their job right now is to grab the evidence that they call perishable, evidence that could be damaged by the water, by the elements, and try to preserve it as fast as they can. It also includes those black boxes. It also includes the air traffic control tapes. They don't use tape anymore, but the recordings of the control tower conversations and the radar scope imaging. And then they need to quickly do interviews with the people directly involved before too much time lapses and people start to forget the fine details or they start to perceive something different in their head, right? You want to grab them as quickly as possible. So that includes air traffic controllers at the top of the list. And then they'll talk to everybody from the crew scheduling department at the airline to the military personnel involved in that particular flight, ground crew, commanding officers, you would expect, airport personnel here at Reagan Airport, fire rescue personnel. So they are going to have a very, very kind of a shotgun approach to this right away. Get as many investigators out as possible, as quickly as possible, grab that perishable information and data, and then they'll try to grab the forensic evidence from the plane itself as soon as they can pull the wreckage out of the water. But of course, the priority first is to remove the victims from the water.
Of course, Tom Costello, thank you very much for being there. I want to go back to Gabe Gutierrez, who is not far from Tom, also live near the scene. And Gabe, there obviously have been questions about airport operations. We understand that Reagan is going to begin operations again in just about an hour from now at 11 o'clock Eastern. Is that your sense of things? And can you talk to about some of the questions? And we've heard from members of Congress, from officials and others speaking to the concern that people have when something like this happens in this country. We saw it in 2009 after that crash near Buffalo. People get scared, frankly, when they see images like these, despite the fact, of course, that flying generally is extremely safe.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Hallie. And look, this crash happening just 16 years since the last major aircraft crash, commercial jetliner crash in the United States. And it has just shocked so many people throughout the country, because as you said, flying is generally just so safe. But as you mentioned, Reagan Airport set to begin up.
Well, one good thing is supposedly in that area of that river, it's only 7 foot deep. So that's probably why we're seeing these two planes, or the helicopter and the jet, sticking out of the water, because it was only 7 foot deep, which it could be very bad, because depending on how fast they were going, when they hit the water, being that it's only 7 foot deep, I imagine they plowed right into the bottom of the canal. We'll have to see once they recover the recovery of the jet and the helicopter. But are you kidding me? Did I hear them right? The plane was full of people that were from Russia for a figure skating championship. My God, it just keeps getting worse and worse. Well, let's continue.
Operations yet again at 11 a.m. Eastern. There were questions about whether that would still hold, but we did learn from authorities that it will hold. And as we understand it, passengers are showing up for their flights to the ticket lines. And so that is scheduled to happen at 11 o'clock Eastern, just as President Trump is scheduled to brief in the White House briefing room. But as you mentioned, Hallie, with the lawmakers asking so many questions, look, this is, of course, such a busy airport, and it has become even busier over the last few years. This particular flight was just added about a year or so ago, direct flight from Wichita, Kansas to DCA. There will certainly be questions about whether this area, this airspace is just too crowded. Of course, we still are finding out more details about how the military aircraft ended up slamming into this regional jet. But from all indications, what we hear from authorities is that there was no communications breakdown at this point. The pilots so far have been experienced. Now, President Trump, overnight, did seem to suggest that air traffic controllers did not tell the military aircraft to avoid the plane, or may have suggested that there may have been some sort of blame there. But from authorities and from the recordings that we have heard so far, it does appear that policy was followed, that air traffic controllers did warn both aircraft about what was unfolding. So certainly we understand President Trump has been briefed and has been continued to be briefed in the Situation Room. And certainly as more information comes in, we expect to hear from the president yet again in the next hour or so, Hallie. But on Capitol Hill, yes, lawmakers from this area, from Virginia, Maryland, and of course, lawmakers from Kansas watching this very closely and demand the answers as we heard from the transportation secretary a little earlier on today. This happening just a day after he was sworn in, and as you've been mentioning, this is a major test for Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, just a few days after he was sworn in. Just so many questions. It's baffling at this point, really, how this managed to happen in an area that is just so used to heavy air traffic on such a relatively clear night, Hallie.
Gabe, thank you very much. I'm going to ask you to stand by. You heard Gabe mention, of course, the reaction from those on Capitol Hill. Again, the U.S. Capitol, just a couple of miles from where this crash happened. Vaughn Hilliard is there. And Vaughn, we understand that there was a reference to this plane crash when one of the confirmation hearings for President Trump's cabinet picks began this morning.
Right, we're just 2-3 miles away from DCA here. In these Capitol Hill proceedings, the confirmation hearings are beginning here in real time, Hallie. It's a big day up on Capitol Hill. And the very first hearing that kicked off was in the Judiciary Committee over here on the Senate side. And Chuck Grassley, the senior senator from Iowa, before introducing Kash Patel, who is up as a nominee to be the next FBI director, asked for a moment for everybody in the room to take note of the tragedy that happened just down the road. You can actually see the hills overlooking DCA from outside the windows where I'm standing right now here. This is a moment where you look at Mark Warner at that morning press conference. Mark Warner, the senator from Virginia, who is also the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. That hearing beginning as we speak right now for the nomination of Tulsi Gabbard to be the director of national intelligence. He is the vice chair of that committee. He, of course, the DCA in Virginia, was a part of that press conference earlier this morning when senators and other lawmakers providing their condolences off the top here. There was questions of whether these hearings would proceed as scheduled. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., his second day of confirmation proceedings is also beginning here. But as we saw with Sean Duffy, the Department of Transportation secretary, was sworn in literally just hours before the two aircrafts collided yesterday. You saw him at that press conference. So it is imperative to have these individuals go through these proceedings and have them be confirmed here. But there is a different tenor around these confirmation proceedings, understanding that there was mass casualty just a mere miles down the road from where we're standing right now, Hallie.
Vaughn Hilliard on the Hill for us. Vaughn, thank you. Let me go back to Gabe Gutierrez, who remains on the scene live. We heard from Tom Costello a couple of minutes ago, Gabe. The NTSB obviously taking the lead on this investigation into what went wrong here. The search is on for those flight data recorders to try to give any clues about what happened. But as you know, from having covered disasters similar, although not equivalent to these before, the timeline is not hours. It is not days. It is months and years to get real answers here.
Yeah, certainly years at least for something quite like this, as we were saying, just baffling at this point. But certainly investigators will look at every single investigative path they could in order to try and find this out. And finding those black boxes will be key. We understand they have not been found so far. Now, again, we're limited, Hallie, with just how closely we can show you with our Zoom.
So I'm also watching another feed on this as we're watching this one right now, right? But I'm watching another one, and they're actually inside the chat saying, "Rest in peace, Joe Rogan. Rest in peace, Dana White." I mean, they're saying rest in peace to a lot of these people. What are we not knowing here? Who was on that plane? Why are these people saying rest in peace, Joe Rogan and Dana White and some of these other people? Who was on that jet plane is what we want to know. I don't know. That's kind of crazy. That's kind of crazy.
lens from this perspective, but and it is so bright. But I do want to show you behind me that is the Potomac. The wreckage is difficult to see back there. It is behind another boat far off in the distance, but we can see Reagan National here. Runways on just closer to me on this side of the river. But this is just a huge, still an active scene, even though this airport is set to resume operations in about an hour or so. The wreckage is within a mile, so it is fairly contained, but it is in waist-deep water right now, where authorities are searching for any more human remains, but also clues as to why these two aircraft collided.
Well, that's
so
good.
again, Hallie, we
That's
are
only
just
waist-high
trying to
water.
find out as much information
That's
as we
bad
can. We're learning
if
more
you're
about the people who were on that plane, and we're awaiting more
5,000
details
feet up
from the
here
President of the
and
United
falls
States
out of the sky.
in about an hour or so. But as you said, this will be a
There's
long
a good
investigation. The
chance
NTSB, of course, this is
the
what they
nose
do.
of
This is
that
what
jet
they,
is buried in the
not
mud.
just trained for, but that they're experienced in. But you said it right. There will be months, possibly likely years, before we get firm answers as to what happened here, Hallie.
And we know that some of those victims include figure skaters involved with U.S. figure skating, Gabe, and the Skating Club of Boston confirming that 6 of its members were on that plane and presumed to be dead here. Talking about what a close-knit community, what a close-knit family the skating community is in this country and internationally here. Can you explain? There had been this national development camp, as it's called, in Wichita, which is why you had a number of figure skaters that had traveled there and were then traveling back home.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We heard from the Skating Club of Boston this morning. Of course, their names haven't been released because next of kin is being notified. But we understand up to 14 figure skaters were sadly on this plane. And we've also heard from Russian state media even that there are worldwide impacts on this, that 2 world champion Russian figure skaters were also on that plane. So this crash sadly is reverberating around.
Well, that stinks. Russia takes their figure skating pretty serious. So there was United States figure skaters on that plane and 2 championship Russian figure skaters. Now, what in the heck is up with that? I have no idea. But the only thing that is good, that is a blessing, is that it's only in waist-deep water. So the recovery should be pretty easy, right? If they can dig the nose out, depending on how this jet went in. So, yeah, very, very crazy, man. But Trump is supposed to be given a news briefing here pretty soon on this. So we'll figure out what's going on.
Around the world. In Wichita, Kansas, local officials saying that their hearts are heavy today. They are planning a community-wide prayer service, memorial service later on today. But as you can imagine, we heard from lawmakers from that area. A smaller city where there's a good chance many people knew people either on that plane or people connected to that plane. And so now, as word is trickling out about who was there, who did not survive, certainly a very dark day in Wichita, Kansas, and really across the country. And it will be a test, President Trump's first big test of this sort of his new administration, his second term, where he will have to act as consoler in chief. Overnight on social media, he did post, paraphrasing here, but he said it was just a terrible night. And of course, the president watching this all unfold just several miles from the White House, we do expect him to speak at 11 o'clock and to fulfill his role as consoler in chief as the federal government continues to push for answers to find out just how a military aircraft could crash in a clear night into a regional jet with 60 passengers on board, 4 crew members. And also we must mention, of course, those 3 military members on that U.S. Army Black Hawk. Hallie.
Gabe Gutierrez, thank you. I want to bring in former fighter pilot Heather Penny. She's also a senior research fellow at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. Heather, thank you so much for being with us. Can you hear me okay?
I have you loud and clear, and thank you for asking me to join you.
Of course. In the last 30 minutes, we've heard from the new Defense Secretary, as Gabe mentioned, Pete Hegseth, giving an update from the military's perspective on what they know. The answer is these pilots, they say the crew on board that Black Hawk helicopter, 3 members of the Army, were fairly experienced. He said it was a fairly experienced crew. They were doing essentially a night evaluation training flight. Can you explain what that may mean, what that may look like?
A night evaluation training flight would be a flight that did not have any mission per se, but would mimic a mission and would be an evaluation, so a check ride. So very intense, very mission focused, but again, a training check ride. But being at night is going to be one of the more difficult, more challenging types of missions that these air crew will fly.
The secretary made the point to say that the crew members were wearing night vision goggles. Heather, can you explain why that's important?
Night vision goggles are very important to mission accomplishment because they help increase your visibility, but they are also sort of tunnel vision because of how they're focused. So it prevents you from being able to use a lot of your peripheral vision, even though it illuminates effectively the scene that's really kind of in a soda straw. But the challenge that poses is that there are known optical illusions regarding distance. Things that are further away may seem closer. It may prevent you from being able to really judge what that distance and that closure rate might be. And these are known optical challenges working with night vision goggles that even experienced air crews have to face and deal with.
We also understand that there's a pause essentially on the operations here for this 12th Aviation Battalion, according to the Defense Department. Presumably just a pause in action, a pause in training while the investigation here into what happened over the Potomac continues. Can you speak to the traffic that is around this area of Washington, that is around this region? We know that it is not uncommon. I know, as somebody who lives here, it is not uncommon to see helicopters up in the airspace. We know how busy Reagan can be with these regional flights here. There's a lot happening in this airspace at any given time, and that includes last night.
It's a very dense airspace, and there's a known corridor for helicopters to be able to pass along the Potomac. And the way that it's constructed is to facilitate frequent operations into Reagan National Airport, while also facilitating the military needs up and down the Potomac. So there's a deconfliction. It's important to emphasize that these operations have been conducted safely for decades. And because of the safety, not only of these kinds of operations, but of American air traffic in general, something like this, a tragedy like this, seems to really stand out.
You talk about the corridor that these military aircraft can take. Are you referring to sort of, and we understand, down the Potomac, right? I mean, that is generally, when you look at VFR, for example, when they're looking visually there or using their radar, that's what they would use?
Yes, so they'll be the helicopters have a VFR, so visual flight rules pathway down the Potomac and up the Potomac that is deconflicted through altitude and also through timing for to enable the traffic into Reagan National.
How is it deconflicted?
It's deconflicted via airspace, via altitude. So the helicopter is supposed to stay below a certain altitude, and as you are aware, also visual lookout as well.
Yeah. How does that work when you are having a plane, like in this instance, that was coming in for a landing at Reagan, which is obviously in a lower airspace? In other words, Heather, in a hypothetical scenario, what should have happened in an instance like this?
Well, what should have happened was the helicopter having visual contact with the incoming aircraft would have been able to maintain deconfliction and either go below or behind the incoming regional jet. Now, the regional jet was on short final, so they were very focused. They would have been very focused on the runway. And again, I think there are a number of different factors that are adding up here that only the NTSB will be able to come down to the final conclusion of the sequence of events.
Heather, I don't know, and forgive me if I'm going out of the area of expertise here. Do military aircraft typically have so-called black boxes? Would that include a Black Hawk helicopter like this?
I would expect so.
Okay.
So they should be able to.
Explain why.
Yeah, I agree with that little lady there. I find it hard to believe that there's no black box or no recorder on a military helicopter or any military jet. So I don't know what's going on here, but I can tell you what, whoever was on that plane, I imagine their families will be, lawyers will be contacting them, they'll be suing. Now, as far as the military involved, well, they'll probably be suing the military and everything. They were saying that the helicopter was coming from Washington, D.C. or something, or Washington. I don't know. This is just crazy. Figure skaters on there, 2 champions from Russia. It just something ain't jiving. And then I was watching earlier and they were saying, well, the military usually don't have black boxes or voice recorders or any of that. I find that hard to believe. That's our information of what went wrong, if it was pilot error or a machine error. And you want to know if it's a machine error. You might have a defective part, right? In a part that is used on these helicopters, whatever it may be. And if you bought a whole bunch of them, of parts, then all your helicopters could be messed up. So I find it hard to believe that there's no documentation or any recording of their flight plan or the moves that they made and their coordinates and all that. We'll have to see. That's pretty crazy.
That's important because we know that commercial planes would have that, right? This flight data recorder that is going to give investigators a lot of information about not just the plane's movement, but also the audio inside the cockpit at the time, whatever the pilots were saying to each other. Something similar, presumably, would be recorded for the helicopter as well?
I am not as familiar with the equipment on Black Hawk helicopters, whether or not they do have a black box per se, and whether or not that does also record the voice transmissions and cockpit interaction between the crew. So I'm not sure whether or not that will be available based off of whether if the Black Hawk had that kind of equipment. If it does, then that will assist NTSB investigators to really peel back the onion of where did things break down overall as they put together what happened with air traffic control, what happened within the Embraer, and then also what happened within the Black Hawk. So it's just fitting all the different pieces of the puzzle together from a combination of aircraft maneuvering, flight parameters, as well as situational awareness of the pilots within the cockpit. It's important to note here that for the visual recognition, so if you say, hey, I've got somebody visual, then the pilot takes on some of those traffic separation responsibilities. At night, it can be very difficult to differentiate between all the bright lights here in DC and the lights that would have been on the Embraer as they come in. And the other important thing to note is when you're on a collision angle, so if you're on a collision to hit something, that doesn't move in reference to your cockpit. So just like when you're driving a car, if something passes in front of you, then you know that you'll be passing behind. If something is moving aft, then you know that you will pass in front. But if you're going to hit something, it doesn't move in the windscreen. And because our eyeballs are trained to pick up motion, if you're in a collision with somebody, it's very difficult to detect because you don't get any relative motion on the windscreen, which makes it even more challenging to be able to identify at night when you're on NVGs.
Especially, one would imagine, if you're wearing night vision goggles?
Exactly, little lady. They might have been doing a training flying at night mission with night vision. And the person that they were training wasn't trained in night vision. Yeah, that would explain that they didn't see. We didn't see it. We had our night vision. And you know, whenever there's a bright light hitting them night visions, it'll blind you. It'll literally blind you. So yeah, now it's starting to make sense. If it was a training mission for the military and they might have had an instructor, professional up there, they might have been using night vision. That's very possible. Their helmets are tapped right into night vision and night vision screens. So yeah, Mamma mia. I don't know. It looks like there's ice starting to form on that river. Hopefully they get a barge out there and a crane and start getting this stuff out of the water before it freezes.
Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, because the night vision goggles will restrict your visibility to that soda straw that you're looking through.
Yeah.
And because of the known optical illusions that make distance very challenging to assess, they could have inadvertently seen the aircraft that was sequenced behind the mishap aircraft and thought that they were looking at the airplane that was being pointed out to them by ATC.
I have to
Again,
imagine.
this
Heather,
is all
go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is all speculation. Having flown, I've flown with MVGs myself. I've seen this myself, but we won't really know what happened until the NTSB comes out with their final report. I will say that the professionalism of the military, the professionalism of these pilots, and the professionalism of ATC, none of this was gross negligence.
To the point that you're making here, I have to think that for anybody who flies military aircraft, what has happened over the
Well, you can't say yet if it was gross negligence, pilot error, or machine operator, machine error. So it's hard to tell yet. Wait for everything to come out. But yeah, they need to get the wreckage out of the water. The nights have been getting real cold there. You don't want it to freeze in. Then you're going to have to wait until it unfreezes. With only being 7 foot of water there, that'll be the first place to freeze. So, boy, I think I'm going to end this video at an hour here, and then I'll be back when we get some more footage.
course of the last 14 hours is the nightmare. I mean, it is the absolute worst case scenario to a very intense degree and a very difficult day for so many, I would imagine, inside the military.
Well, I will say it's not the worst case scenario, but it is tragic for different communities. And really, they're disconnected in terms of causes, but it certainly has an impact overall.
Heather Penny, thank you so much for being with us for your analysis. It is helpful to hear your perspective. Really appreciate that. I want to go now back to Reagan National Airport. We are joined by NBC's Aaron Gilchrist, who is there. And Aaron, you are actually inside one of the terminals. I believe this is like a media staging area. In other words, it is specifically for members of the media. Are you seeing people? We know that Reagan is supposed to open in about 45 minutes. Are people coming in ready to take flights elsewhere? Do you get the sense that the airport's getting back up and running here?
Well, yes and no. We know that the terminals are back open to the general public. The roadways around the airport that were closed early this morning when we first were moving through this area have now reopened, and people are starting to come into the airport. But I'll tell you, Hallie, we checked FlightAware a little while ago, and there are more than 500 flights into and out of DCA that are canceled today. A handful of flights are delayed, and we don't know whether those flights will actually happen either, as the airlines are dealing with the ramifications of the airport having been shut down since 9 o'clock last night, and flights not happening for more than 12 hours. And so the airlines now are trying to figure out how to reposition things. And as a result of this sort of a shutdown happening here, and obviously because of the accident that happened on the water just off the runway here, We know that these more than 500 flights in and out of Reagan National Airport have been canceled today. This is obviously an airport that is a critical sort of commuter airport, if you will. There are flights that happen on small planes, regional planes, obviously to Wichita, Kansas, but also up and down the eastern seaboard to Atlanta, to New York, to Boston, and all that air traffic is now being disrupted as this search and recovery operation continues on the water here, and as the investigation by the NTSB and the FAA and the Army are also getting underway here to figure out the how and whys of this accident on the Potomac River, Hallie.
We also know that some of those family members had arrived, according to officials, in the overnight hours. They had arrived, obviously, before this collision happened to pick up family or loved ones at the airport. There was a sort of gathering area for them. American Airlines officials were there. We understand airport officials were there as well. Do we have any update on where those family members are now? Are they still at the airport? Presumably they've been moved somewhere. Any new information on that?
We haven't gotten an update just yet. We know that American Airlines in particular was sort of in charge of that effort. As you can imagine, when you have an aircraft returning, there are people here often who are waiting to pick up their loved ones. And for those folks to have learned about this as they were maybe standing in the airport or sitting in the parking garage waiting to come in or waiting for their loved ones to come out, this would have been devastating news for those people. And so the airport, the airline, and the airport for that matter,
Yeah, I agree. That would have been horrifying if you were there waiting for your family member or someone to come in on a plane, on a jet, and the jet goes down right there at the airport. That would be traumatic. Yeah, I agree 100%. All right, we're going to end this video. We'll be back once we find out more. I imagine it'll be a while before we see any real data or anything of what happened. They do have by golly, I got a helicopter flying around. Hold on. I think it was Lifeline. All right, we're going to end this video. You folks have a great day. God bless everyone. My condolences to all the family members. And I know Trump's supposed to give a speech about this, a press release. So we'll find out what's going on. Tune into Mr. Trump's press release. That might be going on right now. You folks have a great day. God bless. Keep an eye in the skies. And once again, our hearts go out to the family member. I don't fly. I flew a couple times, but I had to. If I had the choice, I don't like flying because it's not 100% guaranteed. Nothing is 100% guaranteed. If you wanted me to be honest, could it be safer with software that would fly the plane? It takes off, it lands, it does everything. Sure, but when you got such congested airspace, is there a better way? Yes, but it would take time to fix. You folks have a great day. God bless, and we'll see you here shortly.